my pleasure to have Mr. John Schofield on the show today. John, it is such an honor to meet you.
Oh, thanks, Rick. It's great to be here.
I'm such a massively big fan.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
I've been hanging out with John for the past hour or so and telling him this is the most difficult interview to prepare for because your discography is really vast. You've played with so many different people. You have so much different original music. Can you talk about that? About how you've done
I've
this?
done a lot of records and stuff because I'm old. Because I'm 70 now, and I've been in New York, on the jazz scene since 1974. And our generation, especially me, I'm a little older than you, and guitar players grew up with rock and roll and blues, and this whole thing was a big thing for me. And then at 18 I became a jazz snob, and that was it. But I had this early roots from age 12 on in rock and blues and just the popular music of the 60s.
What grabbed your ear about jazz?
Part of it was like if I wanted to be a professional musician, right? And I couldn't be like a rock guitar player. That was just like, I couldn't convince my parents that that's what I wanted to be. But jazz had like some cultural, weight. And more than that, it was, guitar music, right? I was really into it, and bluegrass was around, and blues, and classical guitar. And then there was this other kind of guitar music that was jazz guitar. And so I had a guitar teacher who turned me on to that stuff when I was 14. Mainly it was completely related to the rock and blues that I liked. There'd be a guitar solo on a Beatles song or the Dave Clark 5 or whatever stuff, and that was okay, the guy's blowing there. And then the older musicians that I met said, there's this other kind of music that's like that, only better. And that's jazz, where they really do that a lot, and I just got interested in it.
I was listening to Smoke It at the Half Note recently,
Westward,
and it occurred to me, the first tune, No Blues, that Wes takes like a 6-minute solo on it. That's unbelievably great.
One of the greatest solos.
One of the greatest solos ever.
Yeah.
Single notes, octaves, chords.
Yeah.
Was that a record that you...
Oh, yeah. It was one of my first jazz records. And there was I grew up in a town called Wilton, Connecticut, and the town next to it, there was a record store that had a jazz section, and I really lucked out because there was a woman who worked there named Sally. She was maybe she was 40 or something when I was 15, and she told me what to get, and she knew me because I would come in there all the time, and she told me to get Wes Montgomery and Jim Hall and Pat Martino, George Benson, and she told me to get those records, and she told me to get that record, which was a relatively new Wes record at the time. He had made it already with Windy and his hits, but it would be just like a year before that had come out. So I wore that out.
So what were some other records that what Jim Hall? So Jim Hall and Bill Evans.
I had that one. The first one I had was Art Farmer live at the Half Note. Also same club that Wes played in, and that's with Jim Hall and Steve Swallow and Walter Perkins on drums. So I had that record, and I fell in love with that as well as with the Wes Montgomery. My dad, who was not a musician, when I was 12 or something, had bought me a Django record. Okay. Because he read about Django in the New York Times and said, well, my kid likes guitar, maybe he'll like this. And I bought me Djangology. And, back then, kids, we only had a few records, and they cost $1 a piece, so you had to wait around to buy. You had to wait for your allowance to get another one. So, but I was so lucky that really the first jazz records I got were fantastic jazz guitar records, and I got a Miles record, and I got a John Coltrane record. I even got an Ornette Coleman record. I didn't know they were playing free. I just liked the sound of the songs, And these were like the first 10 jazz records I had. It turns out were all classics.
Now, how did you go from that to actually learning about the language and learning
It
chords?
took
and things like
forever.
that?
I must have wanted it so bad because I didn't know any kids who played jazz. You know, the coolest kids I knew were the kids in my rock band that I could get to go to hear Muddy Waters and B.B. King and stuff. You know, nobody actually could play any jazz in my high school. Not one kid that I know of, and. I knew Dave Brubeck's kids.
Okay.
Because they lived in Wilton too.
Wow.
And they could probably play jazz, but they went away to private school, so I didn't hang with them that much. But I met them, but we played blues and rock and roll together. They were into that, you know. But I had this one guitar teacher named Alan Dean, and he was a bebop wannabe, you know, who was learning himself and could already play. And would go he was doing club dates around in Connecticut and weddings and bar mitzvahs or whatever, and rock and roll too. I'll never forget, he said, yeah, I integrated a bowling alley with Freddie King in Florida.
Wow.
Which I was like, wow, what a life this guy had. But he was into jazz, and he got me going on Tal Farlow and all. So I had these records, I didn't know how to play, and he could kind of play. But
right.
I'm not sure how good he was, really. Bless him. And he just like wrote out how high the moon, the chords. And then he gave me a scale for each. He said, we played a scale, and that didn't give me anything. It was like, what? So it was a long process of basically learning to play jazz by ear, but also knowing the theory and learning about scales and chords and the construction of music.
And did you start transcribing solos? Would you listen to these solos, Jim Hall solos?
Yeah, I would transcribe licks, you know. And but I didn't have anybody to play with. And then I met one kid who was from Connecticut who knew more about jazz than I did. And he played guitar. He was mainly a kind of a blues guy, but he wanted to learn jazz too. And he could play a major seventh chord, you know. And we were both stumbling in the dark together. By now, it's my senior year of high school, and kids today, by their senior year of high school, can play giant steps and stuff, but not us. I remember there was a stage band, a high school stage band. The music teacher who taught the band didn't know anything about jazz. He was a nice guy, and the guitar part, for some of those bassy tunes, I had to learn Little Darling. And every one is a chord, right? And so that was so hard, you know. And so gradually you're learning.
You start to learn vocabulary.
Try to learn, and then you know I had jazz disease and would go. I was already going into the city to hear groups at the Vanguard at the Gate, and not being able to play at all, and being there in New York City, my God, and hearing the greats, you know, heard Monk and Bill Evans and great stuff, and Jimi Hendrix and Jeff Beck, and the smoke and rock and roll at the Fillmore East. Yeah.
Wow. Does it seem like another lifetime at this point?
Yeah, it does at this point, because it was 50 plus years ago.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it was the same old grimy world that we all live in, of going to a theater and having this band up there cranking it, you know, just like they do now, don't they?
That's fascinating, actually, that to think of it in that way, that it's no different in some ways going out to see a group.
You know, here we are with an amplifier and an electric guitar, and then you get a drummer and a bass player that plays the low notes, and you just whack at it, and that's what Jimi Hendrix was doing, and Jeff Beck. They were just really good at it.
Right.
And another group that played around the tri-state area, the Vagrants, which was Leslie West and the Vagrants, and Leslie was really killing it. I wanted to play soul music too, you know. So the Rascals came to Wilton, my town, and played like one of their first gigs after their album came out, or their single came out, in my high school. And I don't know how they came there. Their first single had come out, and my friend was in the audio-visual department, kid, and he taped it on a Wallensack tape recorder. And I would go to his house. He wouldn't let me, you know, I had no idea how to copy a tape.
Right, of course.
So I would listen to this recording of the Rascals live at Wilton High School. I wish I had the recording. It was good. They were killing. It was like Midnight Hour, Slow Down. They were, soulful. And then, all the Motown records. And blues, I was a junior blues wannabe. B.B. King and Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf were playing, suburban white gigs at that point.
Now, but were you out playing with? Would you go out and play blues gigs, or would you go?
I would play anything.
Any kind of gig.
Anything. And we had I started playing in a band with kids when I was 12, and we played all the time until I was 16, and became a music snob. Couldn't find anybody to play with because I wanted to play, I don't know, My Favorite Things or something like that I couldn't really play, but these guys.
Okay, so how did you go from that to actually being?
I went to Berkeley.
You went to Berkeley.
I went to Berkeley, and I was pretty crappy.
Okay.
My first year.
All right.
At Berkeley, and all of a sudden I was around kids who could play and teachers that could play. I just practiced all the time. Went for it,
So you would study this stuff in school, and you'd have classes, and you'd
I had the classes, but mainly, and I was trying to absorb that, and
you'd be playing with other
mainly I
students.
just listen to records, play with the other kids, like, what are the chords to a blues? And there's a 2-5, and you can put this other 2-5 in there, and it's basically the same thing I'm doing now.
Right.
I don't see a huge difference, except for I'm much better at it, and I've developed a vocabulary.
Your playing style resonates with young people. Why do you think that is?
Blues. I think it's because I started with blues guitar and wanted to bend notes and play with vibrato. That's why.
You really have blended those two different styles together, the rock and blues with playing over changes.
Not just me. All the people that came before me, like John Abercrombie and Nick Goodrick, who was playing with light strings, incredible guitar, John McLaughlin, all these, all kinds of Coriel, all these different versions of jazz and rock. My version might be a little more blues centric, because I really was a blues kid who wanted to play blues.
You have a new record out, and the first track that was released, Honest I Do, is from the Grace Under Pressure record, which was recorded here in this.
That's right, it was.
In this building. Charlie.
The version might be a little more blues centric, because I really was a blues kid who wanted to play blues.
You have a new record out, and the first track that was released, Honest I Do, is from the Grace Under Pressure record, which was recorded here in this.
That's right, it was.
In this building. Charlie Hayden's on it, Bo Frizzell, and Joey Barron, I think, plays drums on it.
Plays drums.
I went back and I listened to that recording. I hadn't listened to it in a long time. Charlie Hayden, for example, playing on that tune and on that record, it just evokes this certain vibe. And then
his weight to his playing of that bass. Wow.
Yeah. Now, when you record records like that back then, Grace Under Pressure, for example, are you doing live takes in these rooms?
It was all live. It was all live. I don't think we overdubbed it much.
Would you rehearse and then come in?
We would have one rehearsal.
Okay.
And I would write these tunes, and this is all the records I made then in the 90s.
Okay.
And in the 80s, pretty much. But those jazz records with Charlie and stuff, you could only get them for one rehearsal. Charlie was the biggest name. And actually, that record was supposed to be with Pat Metheny.
Okay.
And Pat and I have been friends for years, and I was a fan of his music. And we were going to do it. I started to write the music for it. And then I got Charlie on board. He wanted to do it. And we decided to get Joey on drums. Joey Barron was my old friend from Berkeley. We had gone to school together. And then Pat pulled out because he couldn't do it. But something came up, and he said, "Listen, I'll do it, but just not this year." And then we ended up recording another record 2 years later. So I got Frizzell, who was already making a huge name for himself in music, and had been doing all kinds of cool stuff. But I was lucky to get Bill, and I'm so glad that we had already played with Bass Desires, that group
Right.
of March.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that music is done in a just live way. I mean, we would maybe put the drums in there, in that booth, bass would be in there, and the two guitars would be out here with some
headphones.
We all have headphones on,
Okay.
you know, and we get a great engineer and a great sound in these rooms right here at the power station.
I mean, literally right here, though.
Literally, we are at the power station where
Because I went and looked at John's discography and how many you did a lot of records here.
Yeah, all of them in the 90s. For sure.
That's how I knew that you'd know how to get here.
Yeah. 53rd Street between 9th and 10th. Yeah. It's still here.
Okay, so you're in. I'm fascinated by this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're in here. You've done a rehearsal the day before. This recording date. What time did you get here to the studio? The jazzers, did they come later?
Yeah, we couldn't start that early probably, but I always wanted to start. We probably started, you know, with a setup. The engineers would get here earlier, and we probably wouldn't start till 11.
Now, are you excited? It's your day.
Yeah,
It's your music.
I'm at 7:30. I'm somewhere. I'm working, you know, practicing.
Okay.
And then would get here earlier to make sure that the stuff is okay.
So if you have music stands, everybody's parts are on the music stands and everything.
Yeah, I got copied out the parts myself.
Right.
And there were lead sheets, and I had gotten the lead sheet method from Gary Burton,
Okay.
who showed me that at Berkeley, and a double stave with treble clef and bass clef. If there's no written bass part, which there would be some, it would be chord symbols down there and the melody on the top stave. And I would do that, and I would Xerox them, you know, copy.
And if there would be kicks or something, you would put those in, right? If there was like an upbeat kick on something, or if there's something that needed to.
Really, with the drummer, I just gave him the lead sheet.
Okay.
And then they would
know. They would
use
the
whatever,
melody.
you know, and I would make a suggestion. Oh, maybe hit that, or you don't have to hit that. But a lot of times, the longer I did it, the more I realized if you get these great musicians, don't tell them anything.
Okay, so you do a take of the song.
Yeah.
Would you go in and listen to it, or would you say, let's do one more take?
A lot of times we do one more take. Earlier in my career, we would listen to everything, and then I realized that was actually getting in the way of my own performance. You know, I get too self-conscious.
Yeah.
And I started to doubt myself. So now I like to hardly listen at all. You know, because the other trick is to get a really great engineer who you trust. And on those records, we had James Farber or Joe Furler, two of the greatest engineers in jazz. And they made it sound better than whatever I would suggest to them. You know, I don't even know what kind of mics I used on my amps and stuff.
Well, I always would say that the best rock records in the 80s, the best rock drum sounds were on your records and not on any of the rock records, because they'd be using these terrible samples that would be 30 milliseconds late, and you'd have Dennis Chambers hitting perfect rim shots every time. And
well, when I met Dennis, that was something else.
Yeah.
And you want me to tell you about how that came
Yeah.
So I played, as you know, in Miles Davis's band, which was a very electric Miles fusion.
Yes.
His own version of fusion that he invented.
Yeah.
I was in that band for a few years, and at one point, Daryl Jones, the bassist, gave me, we were listening to a cassette of P-Funk live. It was the P-Funk All-Stars. And he said, you know, a cassette of this band, which was a very electric Miles fusion.
Yes.
And his own version of fusion that he invented.
Yep.
I was in that band for a few years, and at one point, Daryl Jones, the bassist, gave me. We were listening to a cassette of P-Funk live. It was the P-Funk All Stars. And he said, this is really cool because there's only one drummer in this version of P-Funk. Usually P-Funk had 3 drummers or something. P-Funk live. It was for a few years, and at one point, Daryl Jones, the bassist, gave me. We were listening to a cassette of P-Funk live. It was the P-Funk All Stars. He said, this is really cool because there's only one drummer in this version of P-Funk. Usually P-Funk had 3 drummers or something. And it was like there were two 90-minute cassettes that we would listen to, which was this huge long concert with this one guy who was great drumming. And I remember listening to that over and over again with Daryl. And then I met Gary Granger, the bassist. I met him through Mark Copeland, who was a jazz pianist. And he said, listen, if you're going to do funk like Miles kind of band or whatever, you should try my friend from Baltimore, who's this guy. He doesn't read music, but it doesn't matter because he can play anything. And so I met Gary, who could. I taught him all those tunes, like just played him through a couple of times, and he had this photographic memory and learned it all perfectly. And then Gary said, we played with Mark on piano and different drummers, and really good drummers. And Gary said, you got to meet this guy who I grew up with. And so I met Dennis, and Dennis was a drummer from that P-Funk tape that I've been listening to.
Oh my gosh.
And Dennis wanted to get into playing jazz music. He'd been in P-Funk for like years, since he was a teenager. He knew about me from jazz, so we started, I was lucky I had this incredible rhythm section that just came together.
That was an amazing rhythm section. And so Dennis is on that, and then Loud Jazz, on Blue Matter and Loud Jazz.
Yeah, the record before that is called Still Warm.
Yep.
And that was when I was still with Miles, and Daryl played bass.
Yep.
And we got Don Goralnick on keyboards, the late Don Goralnick, who was a friend from New York who I had met, and one of the great session and jazz players now. And Omar Hakim, who was slamming at that time with Weather Report.
Yeah.
And this was right when Omar and Daryl went with Sting.
The Sting, yeah.
And we made a record, Still Warm. Yeah, so I had, Miles really got me into playing with a funk R&B rhythm section. I was going all bebop before that for a while.
Well, you started, was it Star? But with Miles, it was Star People, and Stern was on that record as well. Two guitars. And then Decoy, I think, was after that?
Star People, then Decoy, yeah. And then You're Under Arrest.
You're Under Arrest, yeah. Al Foster. Well, Marcus Miller played on Decoy, I think, right? Or was it Daryl?
I think it was Daryl, but Marcus was on Star People.
On Star People, yeah.
So when I first joined the band, it was Al and Marcus. And Mike, who was my buddy, we were hanging all the time. I was around New York, and Mike had moved to the city, had this apartment above a bar in Lower Manhattan on Grand Street. And he convinced the bar owner to have music, And it became this great den of iniquity scene where Mike, we would play all night, and Jocko was hanging out. It was crazy. And but Mike was my pal, and he got the gig with Miles. And then after we'd been with Miles it was a while because they made that first record.
That's right.
Miles' comeback record. And then at one point Miles wanted to get 2 guitars, so his saxophone player Bill Evans, who was my pal, got me on the band.
Now you made records with you made the John Abercrombie duo record. You made a duo record with Pat Metheny.
Bill Evans, Mike, we would play all night, and Jocko was hanging out. It was crazy. And but Mike was my pal, and he got the gig with Miles. And then after we'd been with Miles it was a while because they made that first record.
That's right.
Miles' comeback record. And then at one point Miles wanted to get 2 guitars, so his saxophone player Bill Evans, who was my pal, got me on the band.
Now you made records with you made the John Abercrombie duo record. You made a duo record with Pat Metheny. You played Bill Gazelle play the organ. You make records, you love the guitar.
I love it.
Really
Yeah,
cool.
it's a great combination, as we know. And it can also be the worst combination in the world if people don't listen to each other. With those people you just mentioned, it's a blast.
You also like the sound of organ and guitar,
Yeah, I really do.
right? Larry Goldings and John Medeski playing
yeah,
organ.
Yeah.
Now, did Wes's records with the Organ Trio records have any influence on that, or you just like the sound of organ
I
and
just
guitar?
I knew about, as a kid in our band, we had an organ. It was a Farfisa. This is one I'm actually no. In the very beginning, there was a small Hammond organ this kid had, and it was like the smallest
M3 or something.
M3 or something.
Yeah, it's a 40.
We dragged
41
that
key.
around. I mean, organ
Oh,
was
yeah.
in rock and roll too,
Yeah.
and or the strange soul music we were trying to play.
Right.
And at age 13, and then the other kid got a Farfisa, and then he had a Leslie speaker with the Farfisa because it fell off the truck or something. I don't know. Somehow I don't know how they got this. And so organ was always something I was really used to, and I loved the sound. And piano and guitar actually are very similar, especially when they're recording. They can kind of get a little too close.
Yeah.
Organ, that's never a problem. Organ is just this, big pad of wonderfulness, no matter
The
what.
pads or the stabs too.
Yeah, and it's so percussive.
Pick one record that you love your guitar sound on.
Mm.
Is there one record that you said, "Wow, man, we really captured that"?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a lot that I don't like the guitar sound on. Because I've never been really good at getting a guitar sound compared to some people. And I've always been too impatient. And a lot of the records in the 80s I played with chorus on all the time, and that just masks everything. And I was kind of a chorus addict. And then I went to Chorus Anonymous, and I realized I had to
Did it
just
work?
stop. It worked. I haven't had stereo chorus on. I actually have a chorus pedal that I still turn on for like an effect. But yeah, and that kind of was a period. But what record do I really like the guitar sound on? I mean, the last, I would say, 5 records on demand. I like the guitar sound. And I'm also getting deafer as I get older, so maybe I'm just putting up with it.
I noticed that when you play more straight ahead tunes, that you don't use as much gain on your guitar. And then when you play songs that are more groove oriented, that you'll use more gain.
Yeah.
Do you find that the sound, I mean, obviously the sound influences what you play, but how important is that?
Sound is probably everything, you know. And you just get, it's really about turning the guitar down a little bit to get the clarity on the, you know, on the chordal stuff. And then, you know, just turn it up and have your amp set so that it'll break up. I used to use distortion pedals all the time. I used to use a rat all the time. And